The cathedral doors were still closed when the officiant lifted his hands over the altar. If anyone objects to this union, speak now. Silence. Then wood groaned against stone, and cold air rushed down the aisle. A silhouette stood framed in the light, a woman tall and still, one hand wrapped around something smaller beside her. No one recognized her. At the altar, Jin-woo, 35, composed in a black tailored suit, felt something in his chest go cold before his mind caught up to why. The small shape beside her stepped forward into the light. A boy. Mixed features. Bright, familiar eyes. He pointed straight at the groom. "Daddy?" Every guest froze. Beside Jin-woo, Song Chae-won's bouquet trembled once, then went still, her knuckles whitening around the stems. Jin-woo, the man feared across every syndicate in the country, could not move at all. If you've ever believed the truth finds its way home, stay with this story, because this one proves it. The wedding was only 3 months away, but the story that led to it had begun 6 years earlier, long before anyone in Jin-woo's world would have guessed this marriage was anything but perfect strategy. To the families gathered that day, he was the man who never lost, head of the Bay organization, cold and untouchable. The engagement to Chae-won had nothing to do with love. It was peace, brokered between two families whose decade-long war over shipping routes and territory had cost both sides more blood than either would admit. A marriage meant to do what no treaty could, binding the Bay and Song names together so neither had reason left to strike. Chairman Bay had made the stakes plain the night he announced it, tapping his cane once against the marble floor of his study. The Song family controls the ports we need, and we control the capital they need. Without this marriage, that alliance collapses in a year, and men on both sides start dying again. This is not a wedding. It's a ceasefire with rings. Jin-woo had only nodded. It was easier than admitting that beneath the tailored suits and calculated silence, there was a hollow place he'd learned to live inside. Chae-won visited his office twice that week, running through logistics with practiced precision. But when she spoke of the alliance their marriage would secure, he found himself nodding along to a life that felt like someone else's. "You're somewhere else again," she said one afternoon. "You have been for weeks." "Wedding planning isn't my area of expertise," he deflected. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." She didn't push further. She rarely did. But her eyes lingered a moment too long before she gathered her things and left. Director Yeon noticed it more than anyone. Early 40s, slim, wire-framed glasses, Jin-woo's right hand for over a decade. He watched his boss straighten his cufflink for the 3rd time that hour. The same habit Yeon had learned to read like weather. "You've been distracted all week," Yeon said, adjusting his glasses. "I'm fine." "You always say that right before you're not." Jin-woo said nothing. Outside, Seoul's skyline blurred beneath rain, and his mind slipped 6 years into the past, to a night he'd never managed to bury. The rain had been merciless that night, hammering the streets as a car chase tore through the alleys near the river. Jin-woo, bleeding from a rival ambush, crashed into a side street and dragged himself out before his enemies could finish the job. He remembered little after that. Headlights, agony, and a woman's voice cutting through the storm. "Hey, stay with me. Don't you dare close your eyes." Cynthia Adams, 31, dark brown skin slick with rain, curls plastered to her forehead, knelt beside him without hesitation. An architect overseeing a redevelopment project nearby, she had no idea the man bleeding in her arms was the most feared figure in the city's underworld. She only saw someone who needed help. She pulled him into her car, drove him to her apartment instead of a hospital when he begged her not to call anyone, and spent the night tending wounds she didn't understand with hands that never once shook. "You could have just left me," he murmured, half conscious. "I could have," she agreed, but I didn't. Why? Because somebody has to be the reason a person still believes in kindness. Something in him, closed for years, cracked open, just slightly. He didn't tell her who he was. Not that week, not this next. He told her he worked in corporate investment, a half-truth layered over the darker reality of his life, and she never pressed, letting him exist beside her, unguarded, in a way no one else ever had. "You don't talk about your family," she said one evening, sharing tteokbokki from a street cart. "There's not much to say. There's always something. Everyone's family shapes them, even the parts they don't like." "My grandfather believes emotion is a weakness," he said carefully. "He taught me the same. Do you believe that?" "I used to." She smiled, warm rather than victorious, and reached for his hand across the table. "A man who saves a stranger from the rain, then keeps coming back just to see her again. Doesn't sound like someone who believes that anymore." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Jin-woo laughed, genuine and unguarded. With Cynthia, he did things he never imagined. Assembling shelves neither of them understood the instructions for, laughing when the wood collapsed sideways a third time. "You run an entire company," she said, watching him level a picture frame with absurd care. "And this is where you decide to be careful?" "Some things deserve attention," he said, and the way he looked at her made her stomach flutter for the first time in years. Their months together unraveled like a dream neither wanted to wake from. Night markets, small restaurants where she taught him the names of Nigerian dishes her mother used to make. "You're doing it wrong," she laughed. "It's jollof, not yolof." "That's what I said." "It is absolutely not what you said." In turn, he showed her a Hanok village at sunset, an old folk song his mother used to hum before she passed. One evening, walking home past an empty playground, Jin-woo slowed without meaning to, watching a lone swing still rocking. "Did you want children?" he asked, almost before he realized he'd said it aloud. Before all this. Cynthia glanced at him, surprised. "Someday, maybe." "Why?" "No reason," he said, though something in his voice suggested otherwise. Cynthia hummed sometimes too, under her breath, unconsciously, whenever her mind wandered somewhere heavy. He first noticed it during a rainstorm as she sketched blueprints at her kitchen table. "What's that song?" "Something my grandmother used to sing back home in Lagos. It means the road bends, but it doesn't end. I hum it when I need to feel steady." "Do you feel steady now?" "More than I have in a long time." They married in a hushed garden ceremony months later, with only a handful of friends. No cathedral, no families, no politics. Only the two of them and a future they refused to complicate with luxury. It was, he would later admit, the only day of his adult life he had ever felt entirely free. They settled into a small apartment far from the penthouse he technically owned. She taught him to make jollof rice properly. He taught her the patience a good kimchi jjigae demanded, no matter how hungry she claimed to be. "You're impossible," she laughed, swatting his hand from the pot. "Let it simmer." "I am simmering." She kissed him instead of arguing further, and neither of them noticed when dinner began to burn behind them. But even in his happiest months, the truth sat unspoken beneath everything, a shadow he refused to let touch her. The peace didn't last. The Choi family, a rival syndicate that had hunted for any weakness in Jin-woo's organization for years, uncovered the woman he visited every week. Director Yeon delivered the news himself, adjusting his glasses before speaking, the way he always did before breaking something fragile. "They know about her," Yeon said. "If they haven't acted yet, it's because they're still deciding how to use her." Jin-woo felt the floor tilt, though his face betrayed nothing. "How long have they known?" "Weeks. Possibly longer. They've been patient, which should worry you more than if they'd struck immediately." Exactly. Jan hesitated. Sir, I've never seen you like this. Careless, distracted, happy. It means she's real to you in a way nothing else has been, which is precisely why they'll go after her first. Increase her security. Discreetly. That won't be enough, and you know it. The moment they confirm what she means to you, she becomes a target they will never stop pursuing. That night, Chairman Bay summoned him. The old man sat in his study, cane resting against his knee, sharp gaze unreadable. You cannot leave this life, he said before Jin-woo could speak. Not peacefully. Not while the Chois still breathe. If you try, they will take everything from you to punish the attempt, starting with her. Then what do you suggest? He tapped his cane once. You already know. Later, alone in the hallway outside his grandfather's study, Director Jan found the old man still seated, staring at nothing. You disapprove, Chairman Bai said without turning. It isn't my place. But I've watched him become someone worth following again these past months. I wonder if we're asking him to give up the only proof he ever had that this family could still produce a man instead of a weapon. I gave up my own proof of that a long time ago, the chairman said. I told myself the empire was the legacy. I'm no longer certain I was right. He tapped his cane once, softer this time. Watch over him, Jan, whatever he decides to sacrifice. I always have, sir. Jin-woo did know what his grandfather meant, and it was the cruelest decision he ever made. He staged what needed to be staged. A photograph leaked to the right person, a distance that grew colder by the day, words chosen to wound. He watched Cynthia's heart break in real time because the truth would only hand the Chois a reason to end her life the moment they understood what she meant to him. Say something, she begged, tears streaming. Anything. Tell me this isn't real. He straightened his cufflink, the only outward sign of the storm inside him, and forced his voice flat. I think we both knew this couldn't last. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She left Korea 3 weeks later, believing the man she loved had simply grown tired of her. She never learned the truth, and he never told her the 2 words that might have shattered the lie completely, that he loved her still and always would. Cynthia discovered she was pregnant a month after returning to the United States, alone in a small apartment far from the life she thought she'd built. She cried for 2 days, then wiped her face and made a decision that would define the next 6 years. She would raise her son with love, not bitterness, even if his father never knew he existed. She named him Liam. He grew up curious, kind, endlessly observant, the kind of 6-year-old who asked the questions adults spent years avoiding. Why don't I have a dad like the other kids? He asked once, swinging his legs from a park bench. Cynthia knelt in front of him, brushing his curls back. You have a dad who would have loved you very much. Sometimes life takes people in different directions before they're ready. Do you think he thinks about us? She hummed softly, the tune settling the ache in her chest. I think some people carry love even when they can't show it. She had no idea how true that was. Liam had his own theories about his father, most of them wildly inaccurate and delivered with total confidence. I bet he's a superhero, he announced at dinner one night, stabbing a piece of broccoli like it had personally wronged him. Or a spy. Spies can't tell anyone anything, not even their kids. I'd forgive a spy. Cynthia laughed despite herself, the sound catching somewhere between amusement and heartbreak. You'd forgive a spy, huh? Obviously, spies are cool. She rebuilt her career from nothing. Small residential projects at first, then larger commissions as her reputation grew. She never let Liam see the nights she cried after his door was closed. When friends asked how she spoke of Jin-woo without resentment, she always gave the same answer. Anger is heavy. I already carry enough raising him alone. I won't carry hate, too. She built him a life full of warmth despite the absence at its center. Sunday pancakes, bedtime stories, a crayon drawing of a man he'd never met taped to his bedroom wall. "I think he has kind eyes," Liam told her once, studying the earnest, lopsided sketch. "Like mine." She hadn't trusted herself to answer that night. Half a world away, Jin-woo fully assumed leadership of the Bay organization, cold and efficient in every decision but one. A standing order to Director Yeon to ensure Cynthia was watched from a careful distance, protected without her knowledge, never approached. Years passed. His grandmother pressed him toward a marriage that would stabilize the family's legitimate businesses and finally end the fragile truce with the Song family before it could unravel. He agreed the way he agreed to everything now, without protest, without feeling. He never told her about the woman who still lives somewhere beneath his ribs. 6 years after leaving Korea, Cynthia was clearing out storage boxes when she found something unexpected. A folder of documents, financial transfers, security logs, all dated to the final months of her marriage. None of it matched the story she'd believed for 6 years. She hired a private investigator the following week, a methodical woman named Detective Park who specialized in cases exactly like this. Buried histories, staged narratives, secrets protected by people with far too much power to leave a paper trail. "Whatever you're looking for, someone worked very hard to bury it," Detective Park warned. "I have time," Cynthia said. "I've had 6 years of it." What she uncovered dismantled everything. The affair had never happened. The photograph was staged. The divorce was a calculated act of protection, not abandonment. Every cold word he'd spoken had been a desperate attempt to keep her alive while a rival syndicate hunted for any weakness to exploit. And in 6 years, he had never remarried, never moved on, never stopped keeping her safe from a distance she never knew existed. She sat on her apartment floor for an hour, papers scattered around her, and the grief came first. Not clean or simple, but tangled with something closer to fury. 6 years of believing she'd been nothing to him, of raising their son alone on a lie he'd let her carry, because it was easier than trusting her with the truth. "He could have told me," she said aloud to no one, voice shaking. "He could have trusted me to be brave enough to face it with him instead of deciding I couldn't." Liam found her there when he came home from school, wrapping his small arms around her without a word, the way children do when they sense grief they can't name. "Are you sad about Daddy?" "How did you know?" "You always hum his song when you're sad. You just didn't know it was his song. But I could tell." She laughed through her tears, kissing the top of his head, still unsure whether what she felt was closer to relief or rage. Perhaps, she realized, it had always been both. Then she saw the headline, "Bae Jin-woo, engaged, wedding announced for the following month." Something in her chest tightened. She wasn't ready to forgive him. She wasn't certain she ever fully would. But Liam deserved to know his father, even once, even if nothing else could be undone. She booked a flight to Seoul that same night, telling herself this was only for her son. If you've ever had to walk back into the place that broke your heart just to give someone else a chance you never got, stay with this story because what happens next changes everything. The cathedral doors had barely settled when Liam's small voice rang out again, clearer this time. "Daddy, it's me." Jin-woo crossed the aisle in long, unsteady strides, kneeling in front of the boy whose eyes mirrored his own, so precisely it stole the breath from his lungs. "What's your name?" "Liam," the boy said proudly. "Mommy says I have your eyes." Jin-woo raised his eyes to Cynthia's, 6 years of grief and guilt rising at once. Neither of them spoke. The cathedral seemed to hold its breath around them. "You kept him," he managed at last. "I didn't know until after I left." Her voice was steadier than she felt, though her hands weren't. 6 years, Jin-woo. 6 years of raising him alone, of answering his questions with half-truths because I didn't have real ones to give him. I'm not here to ruin anything. I'm not even sure I'm ready to forgive you, but he deserved to meet you. Once. That's all I came for." Chae-won stood frozen at the altar, bouquet lowering slowly. For a moment, her composure cracked entirely. Her breath caught, her eyes glassy, the practiced elegance she'd worn since morning slipping into something rawer. She had always sensed someone else buried in Jin-woo's silences. She'd never imagined it would arrive in the form of a 6-year-old boy calling him daddy in front of everyone she'd ever have to face again. 6 years, she said, almost to herself, smoothing the front of her dress with a hand that wasn't quite steady. She held his gaze for a long moment before continuing. 6 years, and you let me believe I hadn't earned more of you. For the first time that day, her voice wavered. I would have understood. Duty, Jin-woo. I would have understood politics. What I can't understand is why you let me stand here and prepare to marry a man who was still grieving someone else. Chae-won, don't. She lifted her chin, and whatever had cracked in her a moment before began visibly to knit itself back together, dignity reasserting itself the way it always had. I think, she said, steadier now, we all deserve honesty more than obligation. I hope you finally understand the difference. She glanced once at Liam, something softening despite everything. Go, before you lose them again. The ceremony dissolved into chaos, guests murmuring, Chairman Bae rising slowly from his seat, sharp gaze fixed on the boy who carried his family's blood in his very features. For the first time in years, the old man said nothing at all, simply tapped his cane once and lowered his head. Jin-woo brought them back to his penthouse that evening, away from the cameras and whispers already spreading through Seoul. Liam wandered through rooms far too large and quiet for a 6-year-old, touching nothing, asking permission before he sat on anything. You can sit wherever you want, Jin-woo told him, crouching to Liam's height. This is your home, too, if you'd like it to be. Liam climbed into the biggest chair immediately, swinging his legs the way he always did when he was thinking. Mom said you're a businessman, he said, but some of the men outside the cathedral were saying scary stuff about you. Are you actually in trouble? Jin-woo hesitated, choosing honesty over the comfortable lie he'd built a career on. I used to be part of something dangerous. I'm trying to leave it behind, because of both of you. Liam accepted this with the easy grace only children seem to manage, then held up his hand, fingers spread. Okay, high five for trying. Jin-woo, who had shaken hands with men powerful enough to end wars, found himself oddly undone by the gesture. Later, Liam padded over to the couch where Jin-woo sat reviewing security reports he'd tried to hide from view. The boy didn't ask about the documents. He climbed up beside him instead, leaned his head against his father's arm, and fell asleep within minutes, as though 6 years apart had never happened at all. Jin-woo sat perfectly still, memorizing the weight of his son's head against his arm the way he'd once memorized escape routes and enemy positions. Except this, for the first time, was something he wanted to remember rather than survive. The next morning, over a breakfast, Liam declared, fancy but fine. The boy announced that superheroes didn't have bedtimes, and neither, by extension, should their sons. Jin-woo, unused to negotiating with anyone who couldn't be threatened or bought, laughed harder than he had in years at the sheer audacity of it. Nice try, he said. Worth a shot, Liam shrugged, entirely unbothered, and went back to his eggs. He paused, studying his father's hands. Why do you keep touching that? He asked, pointing at the cufflink Jin-woo had straightened twice without noticing. Is it broken? Old habit, Jin-woo said, and let his hand fall still, caught out by how closely his son was already watching him. Years later, it would remain the one morning Jin-woo returned to most, not because anything remarkable happened, but because an ordinary breakfast had quietly become the single most meaningful hour of his life. For the first time since he could remember, he let himself believe the life he'd sacrificed everything for might actually be his to keep. They didn't get the chance to build many more mornings like it. Word reached the Choi Syndicate within hours. Jin-woo had a son, a discovery worth more than any wedding scandal. Leverage, they called him. A weakness finally exposed after 6 years of searching. They took Liam from the penthouse that same evening, while Cynthia stepped away for only a moment. Jin-woo received the call in the back of his car, and for the first time in his adult life, strategy meant nothing to him. He thought only of a boy with his eyes who'd once asked his mother why he didn't have a father. The exchange was set for an abandoned warehouse near the docks, the kind of place Jin-woo had walked into 100 times without fear. This time, his hands weren't steady as he stepped inside. The warehouse was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb that swayed slightly with the draft from the broken windows. Liam sat on a crate near the far wall, small and silent, his eyes finding his father's the moment he entered, not crying, but frozen in the particular stillness of a child too frightened to make a sound. "You should have stayed hidden," the Choi lieutenant said, gripping Liam's shoulder. "A son changes everything, doesn't it?" "Let him go," Jin-woo said, voice low in a way even Yeon, tense beside him, had rarely heard. "Whatever you want from me, take it, not him." Brave words from a man who abandoned his own family for 6 years. "I never abandoned him. I didn't know he existed. But I know now. And I will burn everything I've built to the ground before I let anyone touch him." The lieutenant tightened his grip until the boy flinched. But words won't save him. Every second stretched unbearably long. Jin-woo could hear his own pulse, could see the tremor in Liam's chin as the boy fought not to cry. "Then take me instead," Jin-woo said, stepping forward, hands raised, empty and open. "I'm the one you want. He's a child. He doesn't understand any of this." The lieutenant studied him, weighing the offer, clearly unused to Jin-woo surrendering anything without a plan behind it. That hesitation, brief, almost imperceptible, was the only opening they would get. Director Yeon moved the instant the man's grip loosened, pulling Liam free in one motion. What followed was brief, brutal, and entirely without spectacle. A father's desperation colliding with a syndicate's greed. Jin-woo took a blade meant for his son, staggering back as blood soaked through his shirt. But Liam was free, sobbing into Yeon's arms as backup finally reached them. The last thing Jin-woo saw before the world blurred to black was Cynthia's face, screaming his name as she ran toward him across the concrete. He woke in a hospital 3 days later to soft morning light and the quiet hum of a familiar tune. Cynthia sat beside his bed, exhaustion carved into her face. Liam curled asleep in the chair beside her. "You're an idiot," she whispered, voice thick. "A brave, reckless idiot." "I couldn't lose him," he said hoarsely. "I couldn't lose either of you again." Liam stirred, crawling carefully onto the edge of the bed. He studied his father's bandaged shoulder for a moment, then his face, as though searching for an answer he already half knew. "Are you really my dad?" he asked. The question every adult in the room had been too afraid to voice aloud. The room went still. Cynthia's hand tightened around the edge of the blanket. Jin-woo didn't answer right away. For once, not out of calculation or self-protection, but because his throat had closed around the weight of the question. He looked at his son for a long moment, taking in every detail he'd missed for 6 years. The shape of his own jaw on a smaller face, the stubborn set of his chin that was pure Cynthia. Jin-woo's composure, the same composure that had held through 6 years of silence and sacrifice, finally broke completely. He He pulled his son into his arms and wept, unguarded, for the first time since he was a boy himself. "Yes," he managed, voice cracking. "I am, and I'm so sorry it took me this long to say it." Liam didn't say anything else. He just held on, small arms wrapped as far as they could reach around his father's chest, and none of them moved for a while. Not Jin-woo, not Liam, not Cynthia, who watched the two of them with tears sliding silently down her face, unwilling to break whatever fragile thing was being allowed to exist, the weight of 6 years still pressed against her chest. The birthdays he'd missed, the nights she'd raised their son entirely alone while believing herself unwanted. None of that vanished simply because he was finally telling the truth. But watching him hold their son like he'd never let go again, something in her chest began, slowly, to loosen. She reached for his hand. She hadn't forgiven him yet, but for the first time in 6 years, she let herself want to. Director Yeon lingered in the doorway, something unfamiliar softening his usually composed features. "Sir." His voice was lower than usual. "This is the version of you I always hoped the organization would let live." He adjusted his glasses, his voice catching in a way it never had in 10 years of service. "I don't have a family of my own. I gave that up a long time ago for this work. I didn't expect watching you get yours back to mean quite this much." Jin-woo held his gaze for a beat before answering. "Thank you, Yeon, for everything. For 6 years of silence you never had to keep." "Loyalty isn't only about following orders," Yeon said. "Sometimes it's about waiting for the right moment to stop." In the weeks that followed, Jin-woo told Cynthia everything. The staged affair, the forced divorce, 6 years of watching from the shadows to keep her safe without ever risking her heart again. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she didn't answer right away. "You should have trusted me with the truth," she said after a moment. "I would have stood beside you either way. Instead, you decided for both of us that I couldn't handle it. Not that you loved me. That you didn't think my love was strong enough to face the truth with you." "I know that now," he admitted. "I thought protecting you meant carrying everything alone. I see now it just meant carrying it without you. I was wrong, and I don't expect that to undo 6 years overnight." She studied him for a moment, looking for whatever it was that had once made her trust him so completely. Whatever she found seemed to ease something in her. "No," she conceded, "but it's a start." Chairman Bay visited the hospital himself, leaning heavily on his cane as he approached his grandson's bedside. He studied the boy asleep in the chair, the same sharp eyes staring back at him from a face too young to carry such history. "I built this family on the belief that duty must always outweigh feeling," he said at length. "I see now that I mistook duty for strength, and strength for a reason to stop living instead of merely surviving." He tapped his cane once, softer than usual. "A man can protect an empire for 60 years and still die having never lived a single day of it. Do what you must. I will not stand in your way again." With his grandfather's blessing, quiet, reluctant, but genuine, Jin-woo began dismantling the criminal foundations of the family's empire, transforming what remained into legitimate enterprises and cooperating with authorities to bring the most violent factions to justice. It cost him allies, reputation, and the fear that once surrounded his name. He didn't care. For the first time, he was building something meant to be inherited with pride rather than dread. Chae-won sent a single message before stepping out of the story entirely, one Jin-woo kept without ever telling anyone why. "You once told me, duty leaves no room for happiness. I hope your son proves you wrong. I intend to prove it to myself, too." Months later, a photograph surfaced online. Chae-won at an embassy reception overseas, laughing at something just out of frame, dressed for a life she'd chosen herself. She'd turned down every arranged introduction her family offered since the wedding, accepting a diplomatic post instead. Not bitterness, but the hard-won pride of a woman who had finally stopped waiting for a life someone else approved of. On the afternoon of the proposal, director Yeon walked Jin-woo as far as the edge of the park, then stopped, watching Cynthia and Liam wait beneath the trees ahead. "I won't come further, sir. Some things a man should walk into alone." "You don't have to go, Yeon. You've earned a place in this family, too." Yeon adjusted his glasses, something in his expression finally easing. "My part in this story ends here. The rest belongs to the three of you." He gave a small, genuine smile and turned back toward the car, his duty, at last, complete. Months after that, in the same small park where he and Cynthia once shared street food during the simplest, happiest days of their lives, Jin-woo knelt in front of her again. Not as a mafia boss, not before powerful families, but as a man who had finally learned that love required honesty as much as protection. "No lies this time," he said, holding a small velvet box. "No secrets, just us. Just family." Liam stepped forward proudly, carrying the rings on a small cushion he decorated himself with stickers, tongue poking out in concentration as he tried not to trip over the grass. "You have to say yes," he informed his mother solemnly, holding out the cushion. "I helped pick the ring." Did he really help? He vetoed the first three, Jin-woo admitted, said they weren't sparkly enough for mommy. "He's not wrong," Cynthia said, and finally looked at Jin-woo with the same open warmth she'd once given a stranger bleeding in the rain. Not because 6 years of hurt had vanished, but because, for the first time, she trusted the honesty behind his eyes completely. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. On a quiet afternoon, months later, Jin-woo stood at the edge of a sunlit field, watching Liam chase a soccer ball with a group of laughing children. Cynthia stood beside him, her hand resting easily in his. One of the other children called out to Liam mid-game. "What does your dad do?" Liam grinned, chest puffed with pride. "He protects our family." He paused, considering. "Also, he's terrible at hanging picture frames. Ask Mom." Cynthia laughed, leaning her head against Jin-woo's shoulder, humming that same familiar tune. No longer to comfort herself, but because, at last, she was happy. Beside her, she noticed his hand drift toward his cufflink, an old reflex from a lifetime of guarding what he felt, and then stop, mid-motion, his fingers uncurling before they ever reached it. She said nothing, but she smiled. There was nothing left to hide, nothing left to guard against, only two people who had learned, the hardest way possible, that the family you fight to keep is worth more than any empire you build to protect it. If this story reminded you that real love is built on truth, not silence, share it with someone who needs that reminder today, and let us know in the comments which moment moved you the most.